Skole ngambulo with whatever we do. Jioni safu nola with whatever we do. Hale yidemu new school. Nyepamne nekudlukula. Nyepangiragala gena. Nyepamne nekudlukula. Ibuloke nongoto ni beti sola. Ibuloke ndato ni betoto.
Mingi Congo.
Lamin.
Na?
Lamin te jibe norin te nyamen Lamin.
Kabona wulo kono.
Wulo kono nyinte mo Lamin.
Pabilenki.
Muna ngata afongole.
Haina.
Ngata. Ngoto le. Fabrama.
Mingi. Baba nyola.
Ngoto le Fabrama.
Namu jumara kan kuma diten.
Fabrama.
Jumara mu.
Ndele bare muso.
Nunda mana.
Kamo kata.
Jamani mbere.
Alindo ko.
Jamani.
Bari ngoto man kontande.
Bari jamani fana na mundu ma kontan.
Ngoto minaka ngala min je fon filita la min jibe nori nyaala.
Lamin ila siran sama ne benki. Yala so tol sayni no ko ngol ko momo.
Ngoto.
Nam.
Iterinte yalo ne Lamin hakkilo diata bake karamu ngoto. Anu santeng ministry ko di ngole si suwo ko amanke ko do holi de
si bitun.
Bagona ringa.
Sibitu.
Ala ko kede namo balo ba.
Ala na ko na karta bulo be damna ala nije.
Ngoto.
Na.
Ngoto mon kontan feren.
Jamani mu ne keda.
Ite ka Lamin ko yintay mon ko do fete malo Lamin nyande sila la be la moy kala karango.
Jamani karamol be soron ne ko fasita wulo kono ko.
Karamol ma soron ni ko karamol soron da amanke ko holiday lem. Ngoto. Dini wo nyanta sila la ala karango la moy yamen kamen fue. Man kontan andamande.
Allah nyin kombo kurang adan dalla kombo len do la jankara mol soron da doro kamen kurang ma kombo e don dol fana na karamol soron je karamol soron Lamin ada lo nyino la aman tara fena sokon ala munekela
ama Lamin ite fete malon ko lesinol be ke kar radio to
Nga fine.
e ko nyani mo Lamin ya muna fonye
kabim bina kan tambita nteri maning Fatu tambite la sukala ala diningol bebe siri be la moyka
faru danso am fana tambita jele ni subala la ngaje diningol be jet talanta nen kili warol e be serin jelen
sa Lamin fadante ku kili wo ke no la ba Lamin bita wulo ko no nyinta mo Lamin
aman dara fennela
ite dine ko ni man si yakari lesinol la moy radio to e balon na
muneka ke afonye ba nyara ni alon
telentel jikot
afonye ba munebe ke
ite balon tel be jikritel ni man karambe ku kele yaje nata karana mbasa mala ya etarije
par ñarande kombo courant ho findira kombo ide na raje den sonka bay ko Lamin manya tala wulo ko karam mo be so da fa membe
ko to wole nati bayo ngalle ni Lamin kuntala kombo courant o ka fa me kombo courant asototal wala kinay ko e sisu kono bari ni ko e sisu kono be karangol di ke la radio lin telel to hadi tele masoto to nyaay man tele soto da bungo bar radio be bulen ko to batiri sanga ay si ay alamo
sa do kala
nyaadi ko ta o bulaji
ado kala nyaadi
kamun ke nyaadi
radio abe wala mo la be mona falaje
ibe la karandirol kala jele
ti talle be radio ko men ka karandirol
ila subjector baby jele baby jele
wala nan ka coco moy fa dan so wolya ngom metambi kana ngadi ni wolde be ikadum bungo ko kada maro mo
asototal de
Lamin mala be kara wala de
bari
lafta alal ideal on ko inde every year second wala fourth
mona ni ko ma ko nde ko folle sinila mba nde le sinilo ne ba
say mba foke en koto le fango yen wulindi yalo famo keta bat ñu fanam bulata ko ko don me yen nati jambi Lamin nyanta karana ndel be jiko be nyineka ya bulay kara wulo kana ta kilar ya bambalo yo be bulaje koto dinni ngoy si ayala le sino la moy radio
wara ka munda kara mo man soro Lamin nyanta kara si so na regular
sila le ayala le sino
ndal ko korna ko smalo
kilar ya
mo be ngelo mo say mi do ni ko no kera
mengi bruce
ndal ko la da ba rosa no radio ba no bari woro radio ni abe jele ba ngam do man dembe buljan dala nyara nyara wo ko fendi mo la Lamin tayra ba rosa
bara te ku folo ajibe nori nya Lamin tamete ku
teku
bari ko do famo ke
ja image nañu ñambol si zol le keje kisgi man si zol no le kafun ka ñowa bari ñambu kino ni mañana ka finde ni nambe ko so la ja
ngalle limbeta de be ñambo do dilanna
ñara nim ko ridin fennat ñara nata
bari famo ke da
ngata bungono tammi bungono ñara mel ngando ko fele ko ke e bar nganda ni pelo la ndija
iyo a
la bungono bismillah bisu diara
pendulala yefungo tanka sina dolu tanka koro korota korota
Good day, listeners and viewers. My name is Samuel Emendi. I'm back again with another lesson on ecology. But this time around, we are going to be looking at community interactions. Before we go into community interaction, I think it's good we go back and look at and revise or recap what we have done in the last lesson on ecology. In the last lesson, we talked about what is ecology. We said ecology is the study of interactions with organisms and their environment. After they shape the environment in which they are living. And in our community interactions today, there are other headings that we are going to be looking at, and like interaction, energy flow, and ecological succession. I repeat again, in ecological community, we are going to look at interaction, energy flow, and ecological succession. First of all, we said, why do organisms interact? They interact in order to establish an ecological niche and also to shape the environment or the ecosystem in which they live. And in ecological interactions, we are going to look at the feeding relationship that occurs in an ecosystem or in an ecology. One of these feeding relationships, we are going to talk about competition. We also talk about predation and symbiosis. Symbiosis is divided into three, which is mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. These are feeding relationships that occurs or that takes place in community interaction. Looking at this slide, what can we see? We are seeing trees, tall ones and short ones. And here, what is happening in this habitat or this community? The tall trees and the short trees, they are competing. And when you talk about competition, when organisms try to establish resources, or when they try to compete for resources in the same place and at the same time, competitions always occur. Like most of the time you look at like two bulls cannot drink in the same trough or in the same bucket at the same time. Most of the time they compete. And the one that is stronger will always overpower the one that is weak. So that's what we call is they are competing. Let's come back to the slide. We are looking at these trees. Some are tall and some are short. What are the things that they are competing for? If you look at it, if you look at the slide properly, you realize that they are competing. One of the major resources they are competing is for light. The tall trees, they overpowered the short one. That means the short ones, before they are exposed to the light, the tall trees, the leaves, they are spread evenly. So the short ones do not have access to too much light. We said the ability to compete for resources is dependent upon whether an organism has that adaptation that enable it to compete. And when you talk about adaptation, we said it's ability of an organism to live in a particular environment and survive, provided that another organism different from it cannot do so in that environment. I just want to digress a little concerning this adaptation. Sometimes, like for instance, when a Scorpion, a national team, is playing football, we call some of our foreign-based players, like from Europe, okay? Some of those players who have been playing in Europe, we call them to come to our country and defend the colors of our country. And sometimes the climate that they find themselves, the climate is always hot. It's very, very hostile. Most of these people, they have been playing in Europe for many years, and they're adapted to that climate, they're adapted to that cold climate. So sometimes when they don't perform well, we start insulting them in the football pitch. But that's what a normal fan always wants to do. He always wants his team to win. But most of the time when he loses, he starts to complain. But let's come back to our lesson. Adaptation, because the organism has the ability to survive and to do life activities in that environment. Other organisms, different from that, they do not survive. Here we said trees in the forest are competing for what? Light. They are competing for light. The tall, broad-leaf trees outcompete the small trees for sunlight. So that is competition. So we are moving to predation. We said predation occurs when an organism captures or predates or feeds on another organism, which is called a prey. If you look at these three slides on the screen, from my left going to the right, we are seeing three different interactions in different organisms. The first one, we see a ladybird beetle eating an elf. You see that the ladybird is preying over the elf. So it is eating on the elf. So the ladybird is the predator, and the elf is the prey. Looking at the other slide, we have a cheetah striking a gazelle. A cheetah is chasing after a gazelle. And if it happens that the cheetah catches up the gazelle, it will eat it. So that means that the gazelle will be the food for the cheetah. And in the other one, we have the marine environment, where we have a great white shark capturing a prey, a fish. So these are the different examples of predation. During predation, organisms, they have the ability to hide. Okay, the organisms have to hide from the prey, and the prey has the ability to hide from what? From the predator, and also the predator also has the techniques how it can catch the prey. So that's what it was. So now predation is a driving factor that can lead to co-evolution. It can lead an organism to run away from that environment because it is found ways in which it can run away from the predator. And as it's running away from predator, it is gradually leaving that environment. And also, the prey also is also taking some tactical skills. It's trying to use some of the skills in order to catch up with its prey. This is what we can see in the slide here. So we move on to the other feeding relationships in an ecosystem. We talk about symbiosis. When you say symbiosis, it means organisms living together. And in a symbiosis relationship, sometimes some organisms benefit, sometimes they do not benefit. Okay? So here, when you say a symbiosis relationship, it could be two organisms living together. You say when two species live closely together, they are said to be in a form of a symbiosis relationship. Looking at the slides here, we have three different relationships. We have mutualism, commensalism, and parasitism. These are the feeding relationships that we are going to be talking in our subsequent slides. If you look at this one, the mutualism, what can we see on the slide? We can see a flower and a bird, or we can say you can even use an insect there. And what is the bird doing there? The bird, it is feeding on the nectar of the flower, and as it is feeding, it is also doing the same thing by what? Transporting pollen grains, okay, transferring pollen grains. So, and when it transfers pollen grains, it's able to what? To fertilize the flower. Which says in mutualism, both species benefit from the relationships. And examples of a mutualistic relationship, we said a hummingbird, an insect, and a flower. A hummingbird / insect or a flower. The flower provides the hummingbird insect with nectar, and the hummingbird helps the flower produce by transporting the pollen from one flower to the other. So now in a mutualistic relationship, it's a win-win situation. This one is not dependent on this one. They are all winning. They are all benefiting. But in other relationships, some organisms benefit, whereas others do not benefit. But in a mutualistic relationship, it's a win-win situation. I win, you win. So you benefit, I benefit. So that is a fair deal. So another examples of a mutualistic relationship we talk about, a leech is made up of two organisms, namely green alga and fungus. So now one thing that we can see here, the green alga benefit from the fungus by what is it encloses it and protects the alga. And also it protects it from what? Physical injury and during what? Dryness. When the place is dry, the fungus protects the alga. And also the algae also provide water for the fungus. But the fungus benefit by some of the food manufactured by the algae. That's what the fungus does. It benefits from the food that is manufactured. Another example of a mutualistic relationship, we said nitrogen-fixing bacteria in root nodules of leguminous plants. If you look at what are leguminous plants, first of all, we say these are plants that adds up what? Nutrients, nitrogen to the soil. And what are some of those examples of those leguminous plants? We talk about beans, groundnut. These are examples of leguminous plants. They have a bacteria, the bacterium that is found in this leguminous plant is called the Rhizobium leguminosarium. This bacteria helps to add nutrients to the soil. So the bacteria obtain nutrients from the cells of these plants, grow there, and these nutrients multiply and they reproduce. The Rhizobium bacteria is fixed nitrogen directly into the soil, thus increasing the nitrogen requirement of the leguminous plants. Another example also of mutualistic relationship or mutualism, bacteria in the rumen of ruminants. I think it's good we understand this. You said bacteria in the rumen of ruminants. A rumen is a stomach compartment in ruminated animals. We say ruminant animals are animals that chew the cud. Examples of some of these animals are goat, sheep, cows. They have the ability to chew their cud. You see, these bacteria digest cellulose to sugar. They help to digest some of this cellulose to sugar. And some of these things is being changed to what you call amino acids and vitamins from the food substances. The ruminant make, and some of this cellulose, like the plant part that they eat, okay, those are what we call the cellulose. The ruminant make use of the sugar, amino acid, and vitamin obtained from the activities of the bacteria. So what does the ruminant do? The animal, what does it do for some of the for these organisms or these bacteria? The rumen provide protection, shelter, and food for the bacteria That's what the animal does, or the rumen. So another example of mutualism is a protozoa in the intestine of termites. When you talk about these protozoans, termites, they eat on plant materials and wood materials or paper. And then these protozoans, they are found in the intestines of these termites. They help to digest cellulose. And in turn, the termites benefit because the protozoa helps to digest the cellulose in the food of the termites. Whereas also, the protozoa also benefit the intestine of the termite by providing protection for it. So now the protozoa, it provides protection for the termites. Okay? The protozoa benefit because the intestine of the termite provide protection for it. So here, another feeding relationship is the commensalist feeding relationship. And in the commensalist feeding relationship, we talk about this type of relationship is a win and a natural situation, whereby somebody wins and somebody does not win. When we talk about the mutualistic relationship, that type of relationship we talk about is a win-win situation, whereby all organisms win. But in the commensalist relationship, there's a difference. We say in commensalism, one species benefits from the relationship, while the other is neither loses nor gain. You neither lose, you no gain. You are just there to house the other organism or to provide a protection or way of life for the other organism. Here, we are seeing a Roma fish and a shark. A shark is a big animal or mammal, and the Roma fish is just attached itself to the shark. The Roma fish feeds on the food that's been left by the shark on the part of the shark's body, and the Roma fish is being transported and at the same time protected by the shark. And what does the Roma fish do for the shark? Sometimes it cleans off what the shark. Okay, so the Roma fish is protected by the shark and transported quickly from one part of the ecosystem to another. Pieces of the food from the shark prey are dependent on by the Roma fish. So what the Roma fish does is to depend anything that is left over by the shark, it is utilized by what the Roma fish. So that's what it does. It benefits by that, and the Roma fish is attached to the shark. So the shark provides protection and then transport it to different places in the ecosystem. Another example of this type of commensalist relationship is an oyster and a crab. It's an oyster and a crab. The habitation of a crab is in the oyster cell. So now the oyster cells come and what stays in the crab. We say the habitation of the crab is in the oyster cell. The crab is protected by the oyster, and the oyster is neither harmed nor does it benefit. The oyster is neither harmed nor does it benefit. Another example of a commensalist relationship, feeding relationship, is talk about man and intestinal bacteria. Let's look at it. You have to differentiate intestinal bacteria and intestinal tapeworms. They are different because we are going to look at the intestinal tapeworms later. We said man and intestinal bacteria. We said some bacteria live in large intestine of man. These bacteria feed on digested food of man. The bacteria get some shelter and protection. you realize that some of these bacteria, they get some shelter and protection from this intestine. The man is neither benefit nor is he or she harmed by the relationship. So those as food goes inside the bacteria, inside the intestine of man, the bacteria acts on the food and breaks the food for it to be utilized by man. So that's another examples of what you call a commensalist feeding relationship. And then we move on to the last for this one is feed relationship is parasitism. In a parasitic relationship, it's a win and lose situation. One person benefits and the other one does not benefit. Okay? And like for instance, if two students are in a class or they're in the same school and they are going to the school, sometimes if they are given lunch to go and spend, if they are given money to go and spend during break, one of the students may decide to keep his money and he will be waiting on the other person, the other student. As soon as he or she buys the bread from the vendors in the market, he'll always come and say, give me some, give me some. At a certain stage, the person is what? Is a parasite. He's entirely depending on the other person. We say in parasitism, one organism benefits while the other organism is harmed. He harmed the other because all the food nutrients is being taken by, which is supposed to be utilized by that organism. The parasite is taking all those organisms. We say parasites are organisms that obtain all or most of their nutrients from their host. The host parasites relationships benefits the parasites at cost of what the host. At the cost of the host, the parasites will not benefit. Like here, we are looking at a mosquito feeds on a mosquito feed on the blood of organisms. Mosquitoes carry various types of parasites and viruses that cause diseases like yellow fever and malaria. So now we are seeing that the mosquito survives on the blood of what, the human being. And some of these organisms that also want parasitism, like tick and cow. Some of these tick, they depend on the cow to suck their blood, and some of these other organisms. And then we have what we call man and tapeworm. You see, the human beings, they provide food for the tapeworm. They also provide protection and shelter for the tapeworm. Whereas the tapeworm, what it does, it makes the human being suffer. And sometimes people, you see some people, they eat a lot. And at the end, you see them, they just look like number one. They are just lean, they are just small. Most of the food that they eat is being absorbed or is being taken by some of these worms in their system. That's why it is very, very important after every 3 to 6 months, you do what you call deworming. So that if in case worms are in your system, they can be easily flushed out. So, and we also have another plant here, a mistol and a flowering plant. So this mistol is only partly dependent on its host for food. It's partly dependent on its host for food, hence it is said to be a partially plant parasite. Because it is partially a plant parasite, it depends on its host for food, and even if roots, its extent is down to the host for food. And these are another example of plants. This one we said is Acacian filiformis. It's a thin thread-like stem which normally curls around the stem of the host. Sometimes if you go around the bush, you see some of these plants, they coil around the host. And what do they do? They depend entirely on the host for their food. They extend their root. It says curves around the stems of the root of the host. At interval, sends suckers, because some of these plants, they send some of their suckers, like the tapeworm. You know, its head is full of some suckers. So now it sends of its suckers down to the host, and it takes up the nutrients entirely from the host. So we said it has no roots and no chlorophyll, because this plant, it has no roots and it has no chlorophyll. It will not be able to make its own food. If at all there were some chlorophylls and some roots for it to anchor on, it might be able to make their own food, but it cannot make their own food. Here, the next slide, we are seeing what you call energy flow. And the primary source of light or energy, the primary source of energy is the sun. We said living organisms rely on constant source of what? Energy. The primary source of energy is the sun. If you look at this slide, the sun is reflecting light to the earth. And when this light is being reflected to the earth, about 1% of this energy is being utilized by the earth. The other part of the energy is reflected back. That's what we can see in this diagram. So you say energy flow, sorry, sister, you said how many minutes? 5? But I have a lot to go. Okay. Okay, I'll continue. You say energy flow. Energy from the sun is transported from radiant energy to chemical energy by the process of photosynthesis, and from chemical energy to thermal energy, heat by cellular respiration. If you are looking at this slide, what we can see here is the cow is feeding on the ground, and some of what is feeding some grass, is eating some grasses, and then the animal breaks down the sugar molecules. The sugar molecules that is found on the ground is being absorbed by the animal. So now when the animal eats up these plants, the food is now moved, is released. The animal also releases what you call carbon dioxide. So the carbon dioxide goes to the atmosphere, and that carbon dioxide is being utilized by the plant, and the plants will also use it during the process of what you call photosynthesis. And in photosynthesis, the plants break down, uses carbon dioxide and water to release oxygen, and the oxygen is now being taken by the plants again for ritual. So what we can see is in a form of a cycle. Oxygen is released, carbon dioxide is released by the cow, is used by the plant. The carbon dioxide is used by the plant, and the same time again, the plant also releases oxygen for the animal to be utilized. So this what you're talking about is energy flow. Energy is being transferred in a form of what a circle. Energy from the sun is transported or transformed from radiant energy to chemical energy by a process of photosynthesis, and from chemical energy to thermal energy, heat by cellular respiration. So this equation that we are seeing is energy flow. So like during the process of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide, these are the raw materials of photosynthesis, carbon dioxide and water. In the presence of light, it will give us glucose and oxygen, which is the byproduct of photosynthesis. And also we talk about cellular respiration. The cellular respiration, this one takes place in the cells of an organism. We say they use like during respiration, that's what you call cellular respiration. So now what they use is what? Glucose, that is sugar, is broken down to release energy, and that energy is in the form of ATP molecules. And then we move to what you call the autotrophs. We say autotrophs, these are organisms or plants that make their own food. So that's why we say auto means self, and troph means nourish. They are able to self-nourish themselves. Okay, they are able to nourish themselves. This is what you call. And here, from the diagram, we can see light coming from the sun, and they strike the leaf. And then here, the arrows, one is going up and the other one is going down. The one that is going up, that means that carbon dioxide is being utilized by the leaf of the plant, and oxygen is being released out. It's not needed there. And you also have what you call photosynthetic bacteria. Some of these bacteria, they contain chlorophyll, and you have what you call the chemoautotrophs. They obtain energy from inorganic chemicals and do not contain chloroplast. And then you said heterotrophs. Heterotrophs are organisms. They depend entirely on other organisms for their food. Like what we are seeing in these two slides, we are seeing a lion is eating upon a dead animal, and this other animal is also feeding here. They are entirely dependent on other organisms for their food. We say organisms that rely on other organisms for food and energy are called heterotrophs. So here we had seen the different forms of what heterotrophs organisms. We say there are several types of what heterotrophs. Herbivorous. We say these are like a cow is a herbivore. It depends on plant entirely for their food. And omnivorous. Okay, we see this one eats plants and animals. A carnivore, it eats purely animals. A detritus, this organism feeds on plants and dead animals or other parts of what animals, and then decomposes. They break down organic matter. Anything that dies, it is broken down. So now we move on to what you call a food chain. We say, when you talk about a food chain, we are talking about a feeding relationships. Okay, we said a food chain, the sequential flow of energy from one trophic level to another, from a primary producer to a tertiary consumer, through eating and being eaten. So these are examples of a food chain. For instance, we have what you call the sun. The sun is the primary source of what? Light, okay, of energy. And then in the sun, you have what you call grasses. So these grasses are the producers. And then it moves to what? To grasshoppers. And then from grasshoppers to snakes. And then snake, we have a hawk which we call a tertiary consumer. And then from there, you can, when this hawk also dies, it decomposes, and it decomposes by some of this fungus, and it goes back to that, to the grass. So this is what you're talking about, a food chain. Okay? From a food chain, we have what we call a food web. We said a food web is a complex feeding relationship in which some organisms may be part of more than one food chain, or a network of organisms in an ecosystem which directly or indirectly depend on each other for food. So this is what we're talking about. It's a feeding relationship which organisms, they depend directly or indirectly. And this feeding relationship is a complex one. That means you are bringing more than two organisms together, or three organisms benefiting from one organism at the same time. So these are examples of a food web. It's a complex feeding relationships that occurs, okay, at a different. So now here we are just looking at a feeding relationship to sum up what we have discussed. We said the ultimate source of energy for most living organisms is the sun. Green plants are able to trap energy from the sun and use it to convert carbon dioxide and water into food, okay, into food in the form of what? Sugar, in a process known as photosynthesis. Plants are said to make their own food and are called producers. Animals all depend either directly or indirectly on green plants for their food and are therefore known as consumers. And then we have herbivores, which feed directly on plants and are known as primary consumers. Carnivores, which feed on other animals, are known as secondary consumers. A simple food chain shows how energy is transferred from the sun through living organisms. The carnivorous at the end of the food chain is known as a top carnivore or a tertiary consumer. Most animals eat more than one kind of food, and so in an ecosystem, food chain connect to form of what? A food web. So these are so now we move on to call pyramid of numbers. We say it's a diagrammic presentation or representation of a number of organisms at different trophic levels in a food chain. In a natural community, the number of producers outnumbers the consumers. The number of individuals in a various trophic level decreases as you move first the fourth trophic level. Like you can see in this number pyramid of numbers. from the base, from the down, the organisms are more. As it is going, the grasshopper, it is reducing, the lizard is also reducing, and the hawk eventually is 2. And then also have what you call a pyramid biomass. We say a total number of living organisms within a given trophic level is called a biomass. So has like what you call the pyramid of biomass and the pyramid of biomass, the level they are reducing. The energy. Before I make a leave of you, I will leave you with this assignment. So this assignment, there are some questions that we need to answer. It says, when there are no enough resources for all the organisms in a community, what is the result? Question number 1. Question number 2, tapeworms live in the intestines of mammals and steal nutrients from them. This is an example of what type of community interaction to co-evolution. Number 4, relationship in which one organism is helped and the another organism is neither helped nor hurt is called. E. coli live in the human colony where they absorb nutrients and vitamin K and sodium that benefit the host. This is an example of the remaining questions are: radiant energy from the sun can be directly used as an energy source by all organisms. Number 7, all autotrophs obtain energy from the sun via photosynthesis. Number 8, a food chain shows one pathway of energy in a community, while a food web shows all pathways of energy in a community. These ones you have to write whether it is true or false. For question 6, 7, and 8, you have to write whether the question is true or whether the question is false. Question number 9, explain what happens during energy flow in a food chain. These are the questions that I'm leaving with you for your assignment. So please, I hope you do it. The next class, we are going to start with the assignment and then we will go to the next lesson. I was your presenter and a teacher, Mr. Samuel A. Mende. Thank you and have a good day.